Welcome everybody to this very interesting safety connection. It's for training outcomes on energy hazards in automotive manufacturing. My name is Melissa Morey. I'm a health and safety consultant under the Risk Assessment and Root Cause Analysis Project, or RARCA. I have been with WSPS for about 14 years, conducting assessments and services in the manufacturing and service sector. In my specialty with ergonomics, I've also done assessments for industrial and office environments. Currently, I am working on this RARCA project, and I'm happy to be one of your co-hosts for the session today.
And good morning. My name is Josh Payne. I'm a specialized consultant focused on machine and robotic safety in the West region. Been with WSPS for about 4 years now. Prior to joining WSPS, primarily worked in automotive manufacturing for a number of years, and also worked a little bit in the construction sector and service sector a bit as well.
Wonderful. So as we get started with our session today, I want to point out a few housekeeping / administrative opportunities. So first off, as part of our organization within WSPS, part of our funding requirements is to collect very basic demographics about who is attending our sessions today. So it is a completely anonymous survey. The chat link has been posted in the chat, and also the function number. So it's an optional participation survey. It's really just to get an idea of who is attending our sessions, again, the geographical location, and just understanding who is attending our sessions to make sure that we are able to provide those services to those folks who are looking for this kind of information. You will be asked to provide a function number. So the function number is in the chat, 231233. We will leave this link in the chat so you can go back to it at any time. Again, you can choose to answer all the questions or none of them. This is really just an idea of who is joining us and from where today. Now, this session is going to be recorded, but to make sure that we can optimize your experience within the session, we do suggest that you use computer audio. There is phone conferencing available, but it looks like everybody so far is properly connected. The participants will be muted, and your camera will remain off for the entirety of the session. Now, even though we cannot see your faces, we do strongly encourage engagement. So you can use the Teams functions to give us a thumbs up, instantly engage with our conversation and with our banter. So if you have the option, you can click on React, and then that will give you an option to provide some of those things, and it will float up on the screen, letting us know how we're kind of doing as we are proceeding through this session today. We do also have a few polls set up, again, to ask a few questions. Again, the options to provide a response are there. We'll have a poll appear in the chat and on the screen. Please feel free to provide a response, and that will kind of help us gauge where we're at with some of the conversations. Now, lastly, we do have the meeting chat, so you can type in your messages at any time. Now, you can also ask questions as we proceed through the content. Myself and Josh will be monitoring the chat. If there are relevant questions that we feel could be answered within that topic, we will provide that response or give us a chance to do so. There is also time at the end of the session earmarked for Q&A. So if we don't get to your question in the session, we'll be monitoring that and making sure that we answer those questions there. If we are unable to provide a response, or at least a response that we feel is adequate to your specific question, we may table that back and provide a separate response in an email follow-up later on. And we also do provide some accessibility features for those who do require it or for that preference. If you want to ensure live captions, you can select more from the menu bar. Again, the instructions are on the screen in a visual format. From the menu bar, click on Language and Speech, and then turning on live captions. You can also view the content or the screen in full screen mode. So to enable full screen mode, you would select the view from the menu bar, more options, and then full screen. Of course, if you have any technical difficulties, let us know in the meeting chat, and we'll do whatever we can to support you through that issue. So if this is your first time attending a Safety Connection, welcome. If this is not your first time attending a Safety Connection, welcome back. The Safety Connections are a really great opportunity to have discussions about certain health and safety topics. Again, with ours, we're specifically talking about training outcomes from exposure to hazardous energy in the automotive manufacturing sector. But it's a great opportunity to learn and share about certain things, an opportunity to connect from a comfort level of your own, whether it's in your home office, at your office, in the work environment, and also a chance to discuss different ideas and provide you with some resources, or at least connect you with those folks who have a like mind to make sure that you are engaged with health and safety. And without further ado, let's get started with the content. So this session, it has 3 different areas, but we're going to be focusing on how did we get to this content. So I will talk a little bit about one of the projects that WSPS has engaged in, which is called the Risk Assessment and Root Cause Analysis, or RARCA. If you love health and safety, you know we really love acronyms. So RARCA, but I want to talk about how we got to the automotive manufacturing sector, which is the driver of the reason why we're here today. Pun absolutely intended. Then we'll talk a little bit about considerations to enhance the workplace lockout tagout training programs. And then finally, we'll close off with some of the existing WSPS resources that we have available and those that are coming in the near future to provide some guidance on that piece. Okay, the first of our poll questions. I just wanted to get a sense in the room that we have today with all of you here. Are you familiar with the Risk Assessment and Root Cause Analysis project for the automotive manufacturing industry? So simple question, yes or no? Or another way to look at it is, are you familiar with the RARCA project in general? Have you heard of it before? A better way to answer that. So the chat should appear on your screen and in the chat. Give it a few more moments. Okay. So it looks like we have, a third of you are not familiar with the RARCA, 2/3 of you are. That's okay. That's kind of why we're here to talk about this really exciting project that we are engaged with at WSPS. So the RARCA, again, Risk Assessment Root Cause Analysis, is sort of as described. It's a process, it's a methodology that has been introduced by the Ministry of Labour, Immigration, Training and Skills Development in Ontario, otherwise known as the MLITSD. They are the folks who have engaged the health and safety associations of the province, so WSPS and the 3 other health and safety associations, to conduct some tailored, focused conversations and workshops with selected high industry, selected industries that have a higher risk from an injury perspective. So the process that we follow to have those conversations is generally directed by the ministry initiative, but what we consider, it's really a collaborative approach. So it's an opportunity to bring together employers and workers within that selected high-risk industry, have a safe conversation about the risks, about the hazards that those workers may be exposed to or are exposed to in the course of their work within that particular industry or sector. And then also have a follow-up discussion or conversation about a root cause analysis. The reason why it's a collaborative approach is WSPS is a facilitator of that. We bring the people together, but all of the discussion is generally directed by the workshop participants, or otherwise known as our subject matter experts. They are the ones who do the work day to day, whether they direct the work of others or actually perform that work within that particular sector or industry. So it's injury prevention as determined by that specific sector. The end goal of those 2 workshops is to understand what are the main risks that the workers are exposed to in those selected industries that we complete those workshops. but then ultimately develop some solutions that are tailored or geared towards that particular industry. So again, another way to look at it is by the sector, for the sector. And as a health and safety association, WSPS facilitates that conversation and provides that information out to those folks here. So the reason why we're tailoring this discussion about auto manufacturing is we conducted a specific workshop and we selected automotive manufacturing in 2024 to proceed with the first two phases of this RARCA process. So the first part is to conduct what we call a risk assessment workshop, or RA workshop, as part of the RARCA field. So we had a total of 5 employers representing the automotive manufacturing sector. So automotive manufacturing is not just the manufacturers or assemblers of the vehicles that we drive on Ontario roads. It also includes those suppliers, those manufacturing companies who provide the tools, provide the parts and the supplies for those manufacturers to then provide and assemble those vehicles. So it's the automotive and equipment manufacturing sector that we have selected. So that workshop, we had 5 employers and a total of 9 representatives. So we had 4 workers and 5 employers coming together in that space. We also had some support and involvement from relevant industry associations, the Ministry of Labor, Immigration, Training and Skills Development, and some WSPS representatives to provide some support in engaging that conversation. But by no means do we have any influence on what is actually provided as part of that discussion. So it's a one-day workshop where everybody came together and basically did what we consider a risk assessment. We had a list of hazards that were pre-identified by all the workshop participants before the workshop. The workshop was that assessment. So each hazard was discussed, validated, and assessed as far as the likelihood of injury and the consequences if an injury or illness were to take place. A total of 49 individual hazards were assessed. So basically we went from a hazard to a risk, and ultimately coming up with a top 10 risks in automotive manufacturing. So I do realize the image on the screen is a little bit small. That's okay. In the follow-up email, we will be providing some resources and links to that content that we currently have. Excuse me. So the top risk that was selected by those participants in that workshop was exposure to hazardous energy during regular operations. But you might also ask yourself, well, what do we mean by hazardous energy? So hazardous energy, thinking about it this way, is a source of energy that can potentially harm an individual if it is not adequately controlled, either during regular operations, perhaps folks doing maintenance, perhaps doing troubleshooting. So sources of hazardous energy, again, anything that can potentially harm you. So electrical, mechanical, hydraulic, pneumatic, chemical, nuclear, all other sources of energy that can potentially harm personnel. So the folks that are attending today, I'm hoping that there's a little bit of understanding of hazardous energies. And if not, that's okay. That's kind of why we're here, to have that conversation, to get everybody on the right page. But I've got a chat question for you now. So feel free to use the chat to provide a response. So reflecting on your experience in your individual workplaces, whether it's automotive manufacturing or other, what do you think is the main reason workers are exposed to hazardous energy? So what do you feel contributes or leads to workers being exposed to hazardous energy, whether it is during regular operations, troubleshooting, maintenance? Why are workers exposed to hazardous energy? Or causes of exposure to hazardous energy? So we've got some responses. So we've got some troubleshooting. Okay, so improper guarding or no lockout tagout or LOTO. Lack of controls. Okay, yeah, absolutely. Rushing. Yeah, that's very fair. Especially with the limited time that people have to conduct some of their tasks. Again, any of those issues could perhaps be an area of concern. Okay, so maybe maintenance work, troubleshooting. Great. Thank you for everybody for providing your responses. And that was really the question that we were asking in the RCA workshop. So the process that we generally follow is we conduct a risk assessment workshop and we have those conversations and identify those hazards. From that top 10, the workshop participants decide on what is the top risk that they really need help with addressing from a solution or resource standpoint. So basically, how can WSPS help them ensure that their workers are going to be safer, or at least have the resource to help them, be healthy and safe every day. So this is where the risk root cause analysis workshop comes in. So some time passes. So in September of 2024, we conducted the root cause analysis workshop, focusing on inadequate exposure to hazardous energy during regular operations. So what is contributing to exposure? If we think about it this way, we're kind of conducting an incident investigation without an incident. So we're asking, what is leading to this being a significant issue? So the first day of that workshop is asking the what. What are those main causal factors that are leading to exposure to hazardous energy during regular operations? So are we talking from a people perspective? So how are people following or not following processes themselves? We're asking questions about how do tools and machinery contribute to this exposure to hazardous energy? What are the measures that we might have in place to track or document, or perhaps lack thereof? How does the environment contribute to the exposure to hazardous energy? And then finally, the culture. So how does the workplace culture impact that particular hazard risk? So in the workshop, day one was a brainstorm. So we went through what we consider a fishbone diagram. So we asked the question, what is contributing to exposure to hazardous energy, and why? How is that leading towards those particular issues? So fishbone, you're asking the question why many, many times to try to come up with some commonalities from a deeper cause versus just the immediate or visual causes. The workshop identified 25 unique main causal factors on day one, again, throughout the 6 different categories. What we do again is we narrow that down from 26 to a top 10 contributing factors to exposure to hazardous energy. And what we then do is have a deeper discussion on controls or ideas or solutions to address or mitigate that impact within the workplace, within the sector, within the industry, and within health and safety legislation in general. So the top 10 causal factors for exposure to hazardous energy, number 1 is inadequate training, lack of hazard identification or risk assessment, so lack of identifying the particular issues or causes. It's tied a little bit to the lack of a documented program, or even an inadequate documented program, lack of worker competency. We're seeing here some culture, where there's an accepted work norm, perhaps, about certain tasks that are being performed. Thank you for the person who mentioned rushing. Perhaps it is because of taking shortcuts, inadequate equipment, lack of monitoring, inadequate maintenance, and then also performance evaluation being rounding off the top 10. So when we look at this list here, what's interesting is there is a lot of connection in the background about some of these causal factors. The lack of program, lack of actual assessment, those are kind of tied towards what are the actual sources. But definitely lack of training, or inadequate training, pardon me, is one of those areas that we focused on here. So at WSPS, the next phase of the RARCA is to then start developing some solutions tied to those top risks and top causal factors, but also making sure that it is available to those who are requiring it. So I'm going to pass it along to Josh to carry on with the next topic.
Okay, so good morning, everyone. So to build off of the RARCA and the top factor of inadequate training, we're going to start with a little bit of a poll here and just reflect on why is effective training so important? So take a moment, put it in the chat. This is one topic I'll say as a machine robotics specialist, conversations we have all the time specific to lockout, going into workplaces. A lot of times it's gaps in terms of understanding. But why do you think effective training, just at its core, is so important in the workplace? Not necessarily just specific to lockout, but just in general. Give you a couple moments. I do appreciate the activity going on. We can train the people around the various hazards and how to deal with them. 100%. We know in Ontario that it's important that workers understand their right to know, right? Angela, I love this point. People have different learning abilities. Okay, so we think about training in general. It's not always a one size fit all approach. We are going to touch on some adult learning principles for you to consider. Okay, clear directions, right? What's the standard? If individuals in the workplace don't understand what's expected of them, it's hard to hold people accountable. Even furthermore, if we don't set that standard, then it's hard to enforce a norm, right? So all great points here to keep people safe and prevent injuries. Love the comments, and we're going to touch on many of these throughout this morning. Okay, so just up front, I know Mel just spent a bunch of time talking about risk assessment as it relates to the RARCA. However, when we think about worker exposure to hazardous energy, risk assessments are a vital process. Why? Because it helps identify the hazards associated with the equipment, the tasks, and then it allows the users to develop procedures to adequately control these hazards. I find a lot of times in the gap side of things that workplaces don't have a handle understanding what the associated hazards are associated with the tasks when completing maintenance, whether maintenance, servicing, even normal operation. And in turn, it leads to worker exposures to situations that could be potentially harmful. Okay. When we think about machine robotic safety just in general, okay, and we think about how complex lockout tagout programs can be, different tasks require sometimes different controls. There's different times when workers are exposed to different hazards based on what they're doing, whether it's starting up, stopping, cleaning, maintenance, repair, clearing jams, these types of activities that many of us, I'm sure, as we look at the 6 bullets on the slide, probably happen almost every single day at each and every single one of your workplaces. Okay, so as we go through the next few slides here and the rest of really this module too, think about and reflect on if there's opportunities in your workplace to further do some risk assessments to understand the hazards associated with your tasks, these types of things, so we can do some program validation. Okay. But before we go any further, I think it's important we take the time to reflect on what does the law say about training. Okay. I'll just say up front is that we know that obviously the employers has responsibility to provide information, instruction, and supervision to a worker and ensure that they're equating a worker and a person in authority over a worker with any information regarding the hazards specific to their work. Okay, this is at its core principle. We talked about it already, the right to know. Okay, very important. I will say, based on my working experience, whether it's now at WSPS being involved in supporting workplaces with their Ministry of Labor orders, or in previous lives when I was directly in the sectors, I would say one of the first questions we always got asked when an incident, critical injury, these types of things is, employer, show me if you did everything reasonable and show me your training and direction. And under those scenarios where we did not have adequate training or direction documented, generally we would get orders under these two sections. Okay, so it's definitely something to think about, right? And especially when we get into lockout tagout, we're going to talk about it here in a few moments, is that the way that we control hazardous energy between pieces of equipment can vary so much, right? And that's why it's very important that we set that standard, we provide that information, and we also have competent supervision to ensure that we are maintaining these practices in the workplace. Okay. Not the focus of today's conversations, but we thought it was important to talk about what does the law say about lockout tagout. Okay. Because honestly, in most of the orders I've been supporting in Southwestern Ontario, these have been the most common quoted lately. Okay, this and machine guarding, just truthfully, okay, on my end, and it's common. We get reports every month, from the ministry going through how many orders are issued, and 74, 75, and 76 are very common on those as the top 5. So just as a reminder, specifically talking about section 75 under the regulation 851, any part of a machine, transmission, device, or thing that shall be cleaned, oiled, or adjusted, or repaired, or have maintenance work performed on it, only when motion that may endanger the worker has stopped, as well as if anything can move, it's got to be blocked. Okay, so very important to think about this. I would say on section 75, one of the common things that I see as in terms of gaps, an example I'll use is things such as industrial power presses and ensuring that we're blocking during these activities. Okay, very common, and unfortunately, many of us are probably aware there has been a fatality in the last few years within the province of Ontario on a press where specifically the ministry did enforce and cite section 75 as the workplace did not use a ram block safety block mechanism, and at the end of the day the worker was unfortunately killed in the incident. Okay, as well as section 76 commonly comes up, so where the starting of machinery, device, or thing may endanger the safety of the worker, control switches or other control mechanisms shall be locked out, and other effective precautions necessary to prevent any starting shall be taken. Okay, so just a high level overview of where we're coming from, okay, in terms of what the law requires workplaces to comply with if you meet the industrial establishments regulation. Okay, now common conversation we are having here at the prevention side of WSPS is competent person. Okay, so a competent person, as many of us know, is qualified because of their knowledge, training, and experience to organize the work, is familiar with the act and the regulations, and has knowledge of the potential or actual dangers. Okay, we like to summarize this: know the laws, know the jobs, know the hazards. Okay, when we think about competency, especially in terms of lockout tagout, it's important that not only we thinking about supervision, but as well as individuals who are engaged in the lockout tagout program or have responsibilities. Why? Because if your workers in the workplace do not understand what's expected of them, generally that's where we get confusion, and that's where steps are missed, and we generally end up in situations that may be potentially harmful. Okay, now when we talk about competent person also for supervision, it's important that we have individuals, whether it's supervision, management, these types of things, that are able to recognize, hey, we're supposed to be locking out here. We understand that this is a hazard. We understand our legal responsibilities. Let's make sure we address this now. Okay, so again, just also something top of mind to think about, because again, when we talk about whether it's the worker level all the way up to individuals who maybe are the ones delivering the training, it's important that competency is evaluated and we ensure that we have the adequate people completing these types of activities. Okay, moving forward, just a very high level here overview. So what is lockout tagout? Lockout is the practice of applying a lockout device in an information tag to a means of an energy isolating and a means of energy isolation, that is consistent with the employer's written procedures. Okay, information tag, it's a means of communication attached to a lockout device. These definitions, we're going to talk about the standard here in a moment, are consistent with CSA 460, so I'll come back to that. Now, Emily did put this in the chat, so just building off of what was already talked about, why are lockout tagout programs and procedures so important? Well, our goal is to keep people safe and prevent injuries, right? Having a program, having procedures, this allows us to drive continuous improvement, allows us to adequately reflect on what direction we've given, and allows in terms of open communication in terms of how can we improve our practices in the workplace. At the end of the day, if we don't have clear expectation, a clear standard, again, enforcement becomes an issue. Right? Because if people don't understand what they need to do or that direction hasn't been cleared, ultimately that's on the employer to make sure that those details are given. And if we expect specific outcomes, we want to keep people safe, we want to meet our legal responsibility, it's important that we have a program and procedures to draw back on. So we're going to come back to this in a few slides. But nonetheless, one high level slide that just because this comes into play a few times, Mel's also already mentioned CSA 460, but in Canada, we have a Canadian National Standard, CSA 460-20. It's the control of hazardous energy, lockout, and other methods, okay? So again, it's nationally recognized. It's considered good engineering and safety practices as it relates to control of hazardous energy in the workplace, okay? What do I mean by this? It talks about good practices. It talks about design considerations, training programs, procedure development, even some overlap in terms of risk assessment and functional safety considerations as we're relying on engineering controls for maybe things such as other methods in the workplace. Okay, so we'll talk about what I mean by that here in a few slides. So nonetheless, there's quite a bit of information that when we get asked questions, this is what we fall back on, okay? I will say recently on the few ministry orders that I have seen related to lockout in our region, the ministry, when quoting section 75 and 76, has also referred the employer to look at CSA 460 to provide the guidance, right? So when we think about what the law says, it just says, hey, you need to lock out. It doesn't talk about the how, the when, the what, okay? The CSA 460 help provides more clarity on how do we put that into motion? What does this look like in the workplace? It even talks about what are some things you should have as part of your lockout tagout program, right? So it's a very good reference. And again, we will be referencing it throughout today's conversation, okay? Now getting into the bread and butter of today and why many of you have attended and signed up for the Safety Connection is the thought of how can we enhance our workplace lockout tagout training program, right? So we have our desirable outcomes, okay? So over the next few minutes, right, block of time here, we're going to go through development of lockout tagout programs and equipment-specific procedures and the importance of these, the consideration of level of lockout, identifying who needs what, very important. Different people in the workplace require different training. That's just the reality situation. Again, a lot of that comes down to job functions, job duties, hazards that they're exposed to, okay? Going to talk about what are some good ideas and good content to include in your lockout tagout training program with respect to referencing CSA 460. Frequency of training is a conversation that comes up quite a bit for us here at WSPS. We're going to talk about what the standard says and also some best practices, considerations when selecting trainers, and then finally getting into delivery methods and lockout tagout program best practices considerations. Okay, so first things first, talking about program. Okay, so generally speaking, when we talk about a lockout tagout program, there's a ton of good information in this, right? Whether you call it a program or procedure in your workplace, your overarching program that dictates and drives how is lockout tagout going to be managed here at our organization, okay? So generally speaking, things that are important to include in this, the scope. When does lockout tagout apply? If it's not clear when you have to lock out and when lockout conditions apply and when they don't apply, that drives a lot of confusion, and a lot of times that ends up individuals not locking out when there should be, okay? It should be clear as part of your program the assigned lockout tagout responsibilities, right? We talk about all the time here at WSPS and just for all health and safety professionals as part of this safety connection, right? It's important we think about the internal responsibility system and not only the concept of the internal responsibility system, but putting that into action through our lockout tagout or our program responsibilities, right? Who's responsible for what? What's your supervisor have to do? What are they responsible for? What are the workers responsible for? Again, when we talk about addressing issue and driving continuous improvement, if it's not clear, it's hard to improve, okay? Your program will also have development of lockout tagout procedures. So for example, what are the steps that we're going to require workers to follow for general lockout tagout procedure or group lockout conditions or shift change, emergency abandoned lock removal process, right? Very important. Also, we do encourage folks to consider equipment specific lockout tagout procedures, okay? I'll use this as an example here. It's going to come up as a recurring theme, especially when we get into practical assessments and then talking about that application. But I'll use this example. In my previous life, we had two robotic welders that were right next to each other, okay? From an exterior standpoint, they looked identical, okay? So workers going in would think, hey, these are the steps I have to complete and I'm safe, right? At the end of the day, there was very different steps that were required based on the valving, specific to the pneumatics, right? So one had a two-position valve with a PO check. So what I mean by that is basically there was a valve that trapped the air. So meaning if I locked out the air, there's still trapped air as part of the system. I'd have to then have an additional step to make sure that I was bleeding the system of that stored energy. Okay. So my main point, my key point is don't get me wrong, a lot of workplaces do follow a generic following the CSA. Here's the 7 steps we're going to follow. I think it's also important. I would strongly consider and recommend having equipment-specific procedures of how do we put those 7 steps into actions for what the worker's actually required to do. Okay. Training requirements generally are documented as part of a program. So saying what does an authorized individual need, when's the timing, delivery methods, this is how we're going to track the records, these types of things. A big common gap that I see when looking at programs is, yes, it has the important information in terms of like the generic stuff. Here's the 7 steps to lock out. But where there's lots of gaps and confusion is it's like, when's the training happen? The administrative side, I guess, right? When's the training happen? Where does that training record go? Who's responsible? That's where a lot of the gaps are. And then what ends up happening, like I'll see sections that say, okay, here at our workplace, we're going to do a theory and a practical, and that's it. Does not clarify where the records are going, how that's going to be maintained, these types of things. So guess what usually happens? It doesn't get done, right? So definitely something to think about. And having a plan, we're going to talk about this specifically when we get under the training frequency side, okay? It's also important to consider how often we're going to be reviewing these procedures, okay? Whether it's your program, whether it's equipment specific, whether it's after enforcement situation, whether you had an incident in your workplace. These are all critical elements to make sure that we are truly ensuring that we have adequate procedures based on the nature and scope of our operations in our workplace. Now, one key point that we wanted to make sure we touched on is that workplaces should avoid exclusive use of generic training programs in terms of lockout tagout, and it should also include specific workplace requirements. So everything I just talked about, like the drawback is if I go to just a generic training program and I'm not training the individuals to what's expected at our workplace, well, then there's going to be gaps there, right? Because the program's not training the workers, supervisors, management, leaders on what's expected to them internally. So I'm not saying, like, having said all this, I'm not saying you can't use generic, but there should be a blend to make sure it's clear that if we fill the gaps that wasn't included in the generic, that's specific to our workplace. Okay. We're also going to talk about the workplace specific stuff and kind of application strategies around this in a few slides. Just to give everyone a little bit of feedback where this point came from, that also came from CSA 460. Okay. So even the national standard here is recognizing how that can create gaps, okay? Now, the second point that we briefly touched on, level of lockout training, okay? So workplaces should consider completing a lockout needs assessment, right? To determine who needs what, okay? So some examples going through the middle points here where the variance may change is think about level of lockout, whether a maintenance worker versus someone that needs to complete other methods because they're doing task integral for production. So more of not maintenance tasks, but stuff to keep the equipment going. 2 very different lockout processes, okay? Authorized versus affected workers, completely different. One's more of awareness, one's more of a training. We're going to dive more deep into this too in a few slides, okay? Some individuals might be exposed to potential arc flash based on their tasks, right? So considering who needs arc flash training, who needs the PPE, we got to make sure they understand our labeling, have to make sure they understand when they need to don and doff this gear, okay? So very important, okay? Then finally, the equipment specific training. And to me, this is one of the most important elements for me in terms of when we look at effectiveness, right? A lot of workplaces we go into, they do a generic, do their lockout tagout training. They say, hey, yep, you're signed off, you go, right? But I think all of us can reflect on how different pieces of equipment, and I even use the example of 2 robotic cells. Think about like the controls and the steps needed to control a press versus a robotic weld cell. Very different. One, we're worried about different energy sources. One, we got a block. You know what I mean? So it's different steps. So having equipment specific training and procedures to me is very important. So we have that checks and balances to validate that individuals understand what's expected of them. as well as what they need to do to keep themselves safe. Okay? The nice thing is going through needs assessment and understanding your different levels of lockout training and the different levels of training that's required for people to do their tasks safely. It allows you to have more standardized training programs based on the needs of the worker. Okay, so we're moving away from kind of that generic side to making sure that it's focused on, have we adequately given the information required for the worker? Okay. So gonna touch on the next slide here, and we're gonna unpack the level of lockout a little bit further to kind of make the point here, okay? So I will say just up front, as a health and safety association, we will always, 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 always recommend doing full lockout tagout for everything, okay? So if you're doing anything maintenance and service, we've talked about the laws, we know what the expectation is. Clear, right? CSA 460 does have this other concept of what they call other methods of control of hazardous energy. Okay, what the core concept of this other methods is referred to, or if you're used to the ANSI standard alternative methods for lockout, it's specific to tasks that are integral for production. So to be clear, there's a methodology. It gives you 8 criteria to define what makes a task integral for production. It gives you a framework for doing an assessment to ensure that, hey, if we're not going to go full lockout specific to a task integral for production, we have other means that also protects against the hazard specific to the worker's tasks, right? So again, it's very risk assessment based. From a topical standpoint, really what we're focused on here is this process that allows you to define the difference between what is considered a maintenance task versus a production task, okay? The reason why we think this is very important is because a lot of workplaces blend the two, okay? And they don't recognize how locking out things such as an interlock gate, locking out a light curtain, it's not controlling the hazards in the same way as it would if you went to full zero energy, okay? And I've seen across, whether it's my previous life or whether it's in my current role here at WSPS, I've seen a lot of workplaces don't have a good handle on this. And why do I think this is important? I'll tell you from experience, okay? Workplace is not defining when it's okay to lock out an interlock. Then a worker will go in locking out an interlock because it's like, hey, we do that for everything. Must be okay. It's a good practice. People aren't saying anything. It's a norm in the workplace, I guess is how I should be saying it. The problem is sometimes workers go in to complete a task that might be okay to do under an interlock because, again, considered integral for production. It's not maintenance. We know what maintenance says in the law. Got to do full lockout. However, then they'll see something else. They'll be like, I got to quickly do this adjustment. Maybe I grab a tool and I start making an adjustment on tooling. I have seen in the past where a worker has did that, where a clamp has then started and came down on a worker's hand, injuring them. Why? Because the task that they were doing was actually maintenance, right? In that scenario, and locking out the interlock door, light curtain, these types of thing was not protecting against the hazards associated with their tasks. Okay? So one of the biggest considerations I would say for workplaces as we're going through this, there's a lot of detail that goes into this. You can see even we're spending a couple minutes on it because even this is just topical, like that we're going through. But it's important we clarify, like if you're allowing individuals to do other means, again, I strongly encourage we follow CSA 460, so we follow the guidance provided in that. But we also define, hey, these are the tasks you can do under other methods. If it's not on this list, you have to do full lockout. Okay? Make it clear. If it's not clear for the worker, that's where we get a lot of confusion and we expose ourselves to risk. Okay? The last one we like to talk about here is task-specific safeguards. And I should have actually mentioned this off the top. This is actually a slide from a managing machine safety course that we complete. But I thought it was a good slide for this presentation just because there's also times where you go into workplaces where people might be in and out of lockout conditions, right? Where they're using task-specific safeguards to do maybe something like a visual inspection, right? They got to track a belt. They're looking at, they're doing it in a controlled state following, again, machine safeguarding practices, CSA 432. As an example, where maybe they're watching something using an enabling device. They're like, hey, I see what the problem is. Now I have to make an adjustment. So now they exit the cell, make sure they lock it out because now I'm going to do a maintenance tasks, right? So my key point here is here's another good example of how it's important we clarify, hey, this is what you can do with an enabling device, but as soon as you start making adjustments, we got to flip over to a lockout condition. My concern on this side is I see individuals going with enabling devices. They go in with these types of things, two-hand controls, teach pendants, right? Then they're, this adjustment will only take a couple seconds, not recognizing that their controls might not be adequately controlling the hazards associated with the adjustment that they're going to be doing. Okay. Moving forward. Okay. So level of lockout. We just mentioned we're going to come back to this. Okay. So a really key point we need to think about. Okay. Awareness focus on informing individuals about a topic or a risk, while training teaches specific skills to act on that knowledge. Okay. So going to take a step back here as there's going to be individuals in your workplace, again, really tied into that needs assessment, who only need awareness level training, right? Like think about individuals that might go on the floor for periodically. They should be aware of the lockout side of things. Hey, if it's happening, basically I need to stay away. The awareness training more or less gives people information on, hey, this is the issue, gives them the theory and more or less the fundamentals and upfront more or less of why it's a problem. The benefit of completing awareness training for people that don't have to complete lockout tagout in the workplace is it provides them with the why, okay, behind things such as, hey, I'm in an area, maintenance is going to be locking out this panel. They're going to kindly tell me, please stand off to the side while I complete this lockout so that you're not exposed to things such as arc flash, okay? So the example that we like to use in terms of level of lockout is in terms of awareness, generally speaking, your affected individuals are generally getting, and I would strongly recommend getting some level of awareness training related to lockout. We're going to touch on this and what that looks like here in the next couple slides, okay? In terms of training, we've talked about this, to develop the skills and the competency to perform specific tasks, right? It focuses on the practical techniques, okay? The benefit is the how-to. How do I lock out, okay? And the skills required to complete that safely, okay? This is really the core of the authorized individual, okay? And the considerations for what really needs to be a part of their training, right? They need to make sure that we're giving them direction of, hey, your job function is you got to maintain this piece of equipment, or as an operator, hey, you might have to go and do task integral for production. These are the things we need you to know before you complete these tasks, right? To keep them safe, okay? So diving in a little bit deeper into lockout, tagout training content, okay? So we're going to start with the authorized individuals, so the ones that are executing, completing lockout in the workplace. The training shall be should be completed prior to the individuals performing lockout. I know that is probably an obvious statement, but not every workplace we go into in conversations we have that's happening. Hey, I was an electrician over at this employer, now I'm here. Oh, here's your lock, go ahead. Okay? Again, it's ultimately on the employer to ensure that they have the record, they've provided the training, they've specifically given them the information specific to that workplace's expectations as it relates to lockout tagout. Okay, so I've touched on the second point as I just said that. Other information that is very important is that should be a part of the training is the type of energy and the magnitude in the workplace. So is it, you got electrical energy and it's 480 volts? Is it pneumatics? Do we have chemical, radiation? These types of things. Workers should be aware of the types of energies in the workplace. The next couple are one of the most important. Okay, so methods. Training workers on the method to control and isolate the energy, as well as verifying, okay? How do we verify that the equipment's been properly locked out, okay, and that we've adequately controlled the hazards, okay? Now, another couple points here that we think is important to talk about is sometimes it makes sense to provide information specific to the manufacturer documentation. Hey, you have this switch. This is how you're supposed to lock it out. Take that information, add it to your lockout tagout procedures. That's perfectly normal, okay? Encouraging training workers to the regulatory requirements. Yes, in training, we know competency also talks about an element of the laws in Ontario. Probably a pretty good idea to give them the training specific to the laws that apply to the lockout, okay? As well as input from other authorized individuals, okay? In terms of an important element is equipment specific procedures, okay? So here's the training for the piece of equipment you're responsible for. Make sure you understand these are the steps you have to take, okay? And then finally, documentation. What's the old saying? 9/10 of the law is possession, right? Got to make sure we have the record. If we don't have a record, excuse me, it didn't happen, okay, in the ministry's eyes. Okay, so name, dates, training topics for each individual trained, got to make sure it's maintained. Okay, now another topic to kind of talk about, because as we've talked about so far in the laws, there was nothing that talked about in terms of frequency, these types of things, right? So again, one thing to reflect on, so far we've talked about program and we've talked about some good ideas for training as part of your program, okay? If our program says we got to train every 3 years, well, then the expectation is you're going to have records to show what happens every 3 years. If our program then says we're going to do it every year, the expectation is your program you should have the documentation show what happened every year. Goes without saying, but just a reminder, that's a standard you're going to be held to. That's kind of the key point, okay? Talking about affected individuals now. A little bit later, because again, they're not the ones executing the lockout, okay? They should still be aware of what applies to them as it relates to the workplace documented program, should understand the potential hazards to themselves and the potential individuals. The reason why I think the second bullet is important, and this is all from CSA 460, is that if people don't understand the why behind it, they're less likely to comply and follow the direction, right? One thing I would definitely say is that every single worker at some point in their life, we're talking to manufacturing group, but regardless of where you work, they're going to be working in a manufacturing facility for the first time in their whole entire life, right? So they're not used to the hazards. They're not used to the equipment. They don't understand what the risks are. So it's important that we explain this stuff, because if people don't understand, right, they're less likely to understand and follow and comply and keep themselves safe. And then unfortunately, what that can lead to is inadvertent hazards that were just caused by lack of, well, the right to know, right? We need to make sure workers are aware of this stuff, okay? Still, good idea to have documentation. We did awareness training, okay? You're in finance, you got to go on the floor once a year. Here's your awareness training, okay? Related to hazardous energy on the floor, okay? Quick poll question. Worker completing, executing a lockout tagout procedure on a piece of equipment is considered affected worker, authorized worker, qualified worker. Thank you, Jess, for the poll. You can use the poll once you submit it. You got to close it on your end, but the results are also in the chat, okay? So got 1 vote, love it. 3 votes, and give it a couple more moments here. Okay. Love the active participation, folks. Okay. You are correct. So it is an authorized individual or worker. Okay. So moving forward here, just with respect to time, training frequency, have a plan. Okay. So if we have an action and we don't have a plan, we're just hoping it gets done, and you know what happens when we hope, right? Generally it doesn't get done. So we talked about already like the different levels of lockout and those types of things. We talk about training frequency. The plan more or less is what I'm talking about here is, when are we going to do it? Orientation, upon hire, job transfer. Clarifying these details to me are very important so things don't get missed, right? Adding it to structured onboarding processes, especially for things like on the job training, on the floor training, and ensuring that we don't miss that, right? Like think about this. I'm moving, let's say, from maybe I'm a assembly operator, I'm moving to our press department. Well, when they go on the floor on the job training, maybe specifically we add in a line item that says, hey, these are, we make sure that we document that. We've trained them on this. Here's their practical, these types of activities, okay? The other side of it too is in terms of training is sometimes, and this happens very common in the construction sector, I would say, is that there's times where we need to employ a hazardous energy control procedure that is not normally used during regular job functions. So these kind of like one-off situations where we don't have equipment-specific procedures or equipment-specific processes outlined, okay? This is a good time to take a step back and make sure, and even like non-standard tasks, this is really goes into the same conversation here. Take a step back. Let's develop these in real time. Let's make sure that we're giving the information up front to our workers so that they're not guessing what they need to do to keep themselves safe, because ultimately it's on the employer, right, to make sure that they provided this information. So we're going to talk about that a little bit more in a few slides. So I'll just put a pin in that, because I've seen some individuals use things such as like lockout captains or using permits to help make sure that they are standardizing the non-standard tasks, if that makes any sense. Okay. So the burning question we get quite frequently, how often should we do the lockout tagout training? Okay. And why is it important? Okay. To maintain an appropriate level of understanding, the CSA 460 recommends at intervals not exceeding 3 years or sooner. Okay. So that's what the standard says. Okay. I've seen many workplaces go above this and say, hey, we're going to do it every year. Okay. That's totally up to you. If we get asked the question, we generally will point to the CSA. And honestly, it depends on the workplace, depends on the scenario, depends on the culture, whether we need to do it sooner than that. We're having issues people are understanding. So there's a lot of visual verification that we need to consider. Okay. Now, there's other circumstances that we may have to do some refresher training. Okay. So maybe your supervisor's going around, they see individuals are not complying. There's a lack of understanding in the workplace with either an individual or a working group. Probably a pretty good idea that we stop and do some refresher training, make sure we all get on the same page. Okay. Next side of things, there's been a change in the workplace. So maybe we're introducing a new process, introducing new technology. Let's take a step back and say, hey, yeah, we did your refresher training last year, but here's a new piece of equipment that came in. The controls are different. We're going to give everyone that operates this piece of equipment some additional training to make sure they understand, hey, this is how you control the hazardous energy specific to this new piece of equipment or technology, those types of things. Okay. Or incident occurring. Oh, no, go ahead.
Quick question for you, Josh. So this refresher training, are we just talking about the authorized individuals, or are we also talking about the
affected? Yeah, 100%.
Thank you.
I think both sides, 100%. If you're affected or authorized on the new piece of equipment, I would strongly encourage that they're aware. If there's anything that would differ from what they've already gotten, okay, that's how I would reflect on that question. That's a great question. I imagine many of you are probably thinking that is. I would say in general, like periodic refresher training to me would be important for everyone on a regular cadence, right? In terms of change management, the ones that if their training now is not adequate based on that change in the workplace, let's give them some more information so we can get them up to speed. Great question. Thank you. Last one, incident. Hey, you had an incident in the workplace. Good idea to have some additional training, whether that's with everyone. I see some organizations do things such as stand downs with leadership. I've seen some individuals then also go through and understand, okay, we had this incident. Let's go through almost to what we're doing here at WSPS with this project is what is our root cause analysis why this happened, and let's make sure we squash it so it doesn't happen again and give individuals the updated information that they need, right? Now, one consideration, we see this all the time, is consider tailoring your periodic lockout tagout refresher program to meet the needs of the workplace. So what I mean by this is think about things such as Joint Health and Safety Committee. You do the 5 days and then every 3 years you do the refresher, right? The refresher gives you the core things you need to know. So the point that I'm using that as an example, as I do see some workplaces have a condensed version of their full lockout tagout training that still covers all the important stuff that they need to know, just kind of eliminates some of the fluff and some of the background information that you might only need to get once, more or less. So basically what I'm trying to say is don't be afraid to have a full lockout tagout and saying, hey, this is what our refresher training program looks like. Okay, that's perfectly fine. Okay, moving forward. Okay, we're getting into the last little block here of some of the things to consider. So lockout tagout trainer considerations. Okay, skill and ability is very important. Okay, what's the old saying? I don't bring a plumber in to wire my house. We got to make sure we have competent people that are training. Okay, if they don't understand the core concepts, they don't understand the equipment specific elements, they might not be the best individuals to set your workers up for success. Okay. The other side of it too is having a trainer specifically on the delivery facilitation side. We're going to talk about some best practices here in the next couple slides, considering adult learning principle, but it's very important that we think about this, right? Like if let's say for an example, a good example of this would be and this has happened a few times is like showing up and I'm doing training. Well, if I don't speak necessarily like the language of the worker, what's the point of me kind of training? Are they adequately getting trained, right? So we have to think about those types of things. I would say if it's completed internal, having a trainer that leads by example is very important, okay? If your trainer and let's say you had someone from maintenance or something like from that standpoint as the one training your workers on how to lock out, but they don't lock out, you can see how that's going to create some issues. Okay. So at the end of the day, we want to make sure that we think about that side of things, and the optics side, and ensuring that we have adequate trainers, and as well as the accommodating the needs of the trainees. Okay. People have different learning styles, different language barriers, experiences. Some workers need a bit more mentorship. Okay. So we're going to unpack this over the next couple slides here, and we're going to just do a brief topical adult learning principle review. Okay. So as we go through these next couple slides, take a moment and reflect on the way that lockout tagout training is facilitated in your workplace, and think about if there's opportunities, how we can bridge the gap, and think about how individuals learn. Okay. So adults, we know, have a wealth of knowledge, of experience to draw upon, right? Many of us probably have conversations with workers and say, hey, at my last job, this is what we did. Right, wrong, or indifferent, it's important that we recognize people will always go back to what their comfort, some of their experiences that they're used to. Okay. However, the main point that I'd really like to think about on this side is think about personalizing learning specific to them. Okay, and their role in the workplace. And because kind of to the next point is workers want training to be relevant now. So that's why when we get into, in my opinion, when we get to the practical side and training people to the workplace specific side of things, it's important that people are getting training on the stuff that affects them. If I'm getting trained on stuff that doesn't affect me, a lot of times I zone out. That's just human nature. Okay. A lot of us will have humans and adults just in general have preconceived notions about learning. Okay. There's a lot of times I show up for training sessions, regardless of topic, and it's like, I've taken lockout tagout training 40 times. What am I doing here? Right now, it does humble, and it feels great at the end when people are like, they're like, that was a really good session or what have you. But at the end of the day, people a lot of times do have a preconceived notion about a topic. Hey, I know this. I'm an electrician. I know what I'm doing. I don't need to do this. It's important that we make sure that we relate the information back to them, as well as ensure that they understand how important it is to keep them safe. Okay. And the importance from that standpoint, because honestly, a lot of times, some of the most difficult conversations I've had in the workplace has been, hey, I'm an engineer. I know what I'm doing. I don't need to follow this. Well, just as a reminder, just to be clear, and this is a conversation I have probably almost on a weekly basis, is when we went through the laws on the lockout, did it say, hey, you only have to lock out unless you are these positions? No, the laws are the laws. The expectation is the same for everyone. Okay, so just something to keep in mind. Going over the next slide, something we briefly touched on. Everyone learns differently. Okay, some people are visual learners. I see what you're saying. Some people more like the audio side. I hear you. Kinesthetic. Let me try. Okay. Individuals learn, like I said, learn differently. So it's a good consideration to think about how can we have a blended training program so we reach and accommodate the different types of learning styles in the workplace. If we follow these principles, it will help have more desirable outcomes. And that's why we're in this conversation today. Okay. So we are going to build back off this adult learning principles here in a moment, but we're going to pull in another poll. Okay. Workplaces should consider adult learning principles when developing training programs to accommodate the various learning types in the workplace. Is that true or false? Give you a couple moments, sorry. And we're getting close to lunch. Give you a couple moments. I do appreciate everyone taking the time to answer these polls. Okay. Yeah, the answer is I agree. It's true. It's important we think about that. Okay. So we're gonna build off this now. Okay. And just quickly, we're gonna reference what the CSA 460 says. Okay. So in terms of delivery methods, as part of the CSA 460, it says, hey, delivery methods may include, but shall not be limited to, formal instruction, computer-based interaction training, simulations, practical demonstration, and application. Okay, so the standard's not really exactly clear on it. Now, I'll just tell you based on my experience. We know that generally speaking, a general rule of thumb, is that people only remember about 30% of the stuff you say in these settings right now, right? You're going to forget 70%. Maybe you thought something I said it was funny, so it stuck out, what have you, okay? Or you thought I said something that related back to your workplace, okay? So building off of why it's important to consider having blended training programs is it allows you to also reinforce concepts, right? And also the equipment specific side. I would say, honestly, in my previous life doing Lockout Tagout training, probably deliver training, it'd be over 1,000 workers, truthfully. Okay. Over that time, you wouldn't believe, like most times we would do the theory, they would do a test, we would get on the floor to start doing the practicals, and the workers would be confused, right? Because our general theory was not equipment specific. And we have to also remember some individuals that may understand concepts, but then some individuals might not understand, okay, how do I take this and apply it to my work? Okay. And that's why having equipment specific procedures, these types of things are very important. I found that completing practical assessments really did help reinforce the knowledge, the expectations, and validation for us as the employer to make sure that, hey, this worker understands it. Now, let's take a step back. I'll do the definition here. So a practical assessment is the evaluation of the ability of an individual's ability to perform specific hands-on tasks. Some workplaces might do this through a real situation with doing it on a piece of equipment. I've also seen some workplaces do it in simulated work environments, such as like dojo stations, these types of things. They have a station wired up with panels and whatnot where they can train that side. We know the adult learning principle, though, like I was talking about, make it specific to their application. Now, this doesn't have to be like as it comes across as harsh when you see a slide. Generally speaking, most practicals I've ever seen where we've had the most desirable outcomes, right? The individual executing the practical and the worker that's the trainee, I guess, as I should be saying. Generally, what would happen, there'd be a little bit of mentorship at the beginning. Hey, I'm going to walk you through on how to lock this out. These are the steps. We're going to go through it together. Now it's your turn. Here's your lock. Show me you understand this, and we'll walk through it together. And there was times, folks, where we would do that, and it was very clear, hey, this worker's not ready to be by themselves. We're going to talk about the mentoring ship here in a little bit, in a couple slides, but nonetheless, it was a good checks and balances as well as validation for us, because obviously going through a generic training program in the workplace, we had hundreds of pieces of equipment on the floor. We weren't going through every single equipment specific placard or procedure with individuals. We left that on the practical. And honestly, I thought it was one of the most important elements of a Lockout Tagout program. And in conversations I've had with enforcement, our friends at the Ministry of Labor, they've also said, hey, they've seen a lot of more desirable outcomes, individuals understanding what's expected of them when they've implemented or considered having a practical element to their training. Okay. Now, a couple points I would strongly recommend is tailoring your practical assessments based on the application. So maybe we have one for example, maybe we have a specific practical for industrial power press. Maybe we have one for our large conveyor system in our workplace that specifically tie to if there's anything specific that the worker would need to know. So for example, on a press, having a line item to make sure that they're blocking before they're going in, or on a conveyor, maybe it's something to do with the residual energy to make sure that the conveyor stops before they start doing any of their tasks, right? So these are all things to think about, okay? Now, just a high-level key point, it does not have to be the same person that did your theory training that completes the practical. A lot of workplaces that I go into, they'll have two different individuals. And because as long as the individual that's knowledgeable on the topic that they're doing, that's the key point, right? We're also going to get into some best practices here on the next couple slides. And this actually, I'm going to skip one slide. I'm going to come back here in a second. Is that in this case, one of the key points that I think can be a good idea to help with your desirable outcomes is having supervision, management, what have you, or whoever is responsible for that work area, be the ones to complete the practical. Why? Because if they have to hold the workers accountable, it's good to make sure that they're talking on the same wavelength, as well as completing practicals on your supervisors first before they're doing this, so that they can then relate that knowledge back down to their workers. To me, that's a very good idea. Okay. Now, back to what the actual slides focused on here is think about considerations for us to enhance our lockout tagout program. Okay. This is really like the last few slides we're going to go through before I hand it back over to Mel. But nonetheless, the key points here is that there should be opportunities for workplaces to assess the effectiveness of their training program. Yes, assess, right? Plan, do, check, act. We want to make sure that we're assessing and we're acting, right? So it's important that we think about, there's a number of different ways we do this. Maybe it's a theory-based verification quiz at the end. Hey, we train our workers this concept. Let's make sure they understand and our training is clear. So we're going to do a test to make sure they understand it. Okay. We'll review the wrong answers with them, make sure that they understand the theory. Okay. Supervisor training, again, in enforcement. If your supervisors and your frontline staff are not engaged in this process, it does open a little bit of a can of worms because it's hard to have that consistency on the plant floor. Okay. The other side of it too is you're going to have supervisors. Many of you are 3-shift operations. If people are only locking out on day shift because we're relying on our safety department to manage it, what's the behavior on afternoons? This is why it's important that we think about the IRS, who's responsible for what, and ensuring we set them up for success and that they have the knowledge, experience, and what have you to be able to appropriately manage. Okay. Very good, healthy practice, complete lockout tagout audits. Let's have someone audit our supervisors, audit the workers, and make sure that, hey, I see someone locking out. Let's go do a periodic audit on this to make sure that they're doing what they're supposed to. That's a great opportunity to identify if there are gaps. Maybe there's some, when I say gaps, whether it's equipment available, maybe the procedures aren't clear, so on and so forth. Okay. Giving the Joint Health and Safety Committee and workers, or health and safety rep if you're a smaller business, the opportunity to provide feedback. I think this is a great opportunity and a great practice in the workplace. Why? Because lockout tagout, we got to make sure we're all on the same page. If the Joint Health and Safety Committee, the worker side, don't understand what's as part of the procedure, as part of the practice, a part of the way things are laid out, again, that drives confusion. Got to be clear, right? And then, like we talked about, incident investigation and proper root cause analysis. Okay. Other considerations to make sure that we are maintaining operational excellence as it comes to our lockout tagout. Okay. So mentorship programs, like I talked about, there might not be individuals that are ready in that moment to be working on them by themselves and locking out. I've seen a lot of workplaces implement like a mentorship program where it's like, hey, you're going to work under the mentorship. You're a new electrician here. We're going to have you work under a senior electrician, get the skill set going on, still follow in lockout tagout practices, making sure they're adhering to the expectations of the workplace, but making sure that they get some time to understand, get some hands-on experience as to learn what the expectations are. Okay. Development and maintenance of equipment-specific lockout tagout procedures. So first things first is developing them and then having a plan to inspect and ensure that they are maintaining good working condition, whether you add them to a PM, an audit plan, whether you have a change management process in the workplace that we consider, hey, is this change going to change our lockout tagout procedure? These types of things. Okay. Also, we briefly scratched the surface on this, is the use of a permit or a lockout tagout captain system. Okay, thinking about things such as it's like a pre-job task, pre-job procedure development for non-standard tasks. I've seen some workplaces that say, hey, we're going to use a captain system because we're having a lot of issues at the worker level, so we want to make sure we add in another layer of oversight. So what I mean by this in a captain system or a permit where there's very structured documentation, sign off, looping in terms of a lockout tagout captain would be someone that has lots of experience that can oversee the lockout for the workers as it's happening. Very common in construction, I would say. I would also like to consider, and I've seen workplaces do this, especially in the federal space, of using a permit system, especially if there's not a documented procedure. Because then truthfully what they end up doing is they take the permit and then they use that to develop their placard. Because basically the permit system is just in real time developing those key details that are a part of a placard. Okay. Couple more slides out of me and we're almost done. Okay. So other considerations. Okay. Thinking about how your equipment is managed in the workplace. Okay. I've seen some workplaces that they get hired, they give them the locks without any training, and then what ends up happening, they end up getting the lock. So they end up locking out when they're not properly trained. So think about how we're managing locks and managing lockout tagout equipment to ensure that only individuals that are properly trained are given access to these materials. Okay. We talked about language barriers, okay, and considering ensuring you have the information in the languages present in the workplace. In a previous life, we had a plant where we had individuals, like it was we had a lot of individuals that did not speak English, Lebanese. What we ended up doing is we hired someone full time to make sure they're helping with our onboarding and as well as translating our documents so that when we went on the floor and we did the practicals, these types of things, they also were given the information in their language, so it's the same expectation. Okay, very important. If I don't speak English and I can't read the documents, what good are them for me, right? So the expectation to give direction to workers is consistent for everyone in your workplace. Okay. Finally, probably one of the most important points that I will make is leadership, involvement, influence, and ownership. Okay. They need to take ownership over this, right? And ensure that they're also driving consistent messaging. Is it, hey, we're going to lock out because we need to, and it's an expectation in the workplace, or is it we're going to lock out because we have time to? Or like, hey, things get into a pinch, where the equipment's running hot, things are gonna get out the door right now, quickly do it. And we go against our lockout tagout practices. That's when we run into danger and people get hurt. Okay. The last point kind of underneath of that is, I would say positive reinforcement is contagious, right? People learn more from positive reinforcement generally than on the discipline side. So I would strongly encourage, even from a leadership standpoint, when you see someone locking out, give them a thumbs up and say, hey, good job, right? To make sure that they understand that they're doing what they're supposed to. Okay. So very last poll. Workplaces can assess the effectiveness of their lockout tagout programs through methods such as theory-based verification through quizzes, supervisor training, periodic audits, feedback from the committee worker, incident investigations, and all of the above. What do you think? Give it a moment or two. Thank you for the ones that are voting. Much, 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 much appreciated. And you are correct, okay? I have to ask harder questions the next time, I think. Either that or you guys are very good participants. I'm going to lean to the latter of those two statements. So getting into the WSPS, how we can help, okay? We have a ton of free resources on our website. We have consultants that can help you with any of your questions, whether on various health and safety topics, including machine guarding and lockout tagout. What I will say is there will be an email that we plan on sending out tomorrow that will go through some of the resources that we have related to the topic. One thing that I'm very excited, and Mel is too, coming from this RARCA, is the lockout tagout program audit checklist, where we've developed a tool working with the industry to understand, hey, here's a tool for you to go back to assess your program and assess your training, elements of your programs to ensure that you consider where there might be some gaps or validation of what current practices. There's also a ton of resources on our website. I'm not going to spend a bunch of time on this because I know there's a QR code, but we're going to send links with all this stuff tomorrow. Okay. The last slide I'll say is on the machine safety side. Things we run a bunch of courses, a bunch of service offerings, whether it's things such as safeguarding of machinery, lockout tagout. We can even do lockout tagout placard development for you if you need assistance on that standpoint, risk assessments, these types of things. Okay. So with that, I will turn it back over and we'll wrap up the session.
Thanks, Josh. So I'm just going to downshift a little bit here, kind of relating back to the automotive manufacturing piece here. So the reason why we focus on inadequate training for exposure to hazardous energy is that was the top risk selected by the industries in that RARCA. So if you actually click on that little blue bubble, it will bring you right to the landing page that we have all related to the RARCA and also the resources kind of geared towards the automotive manufacturing sector. If there's one takeaway that we will definitely highlight in the email tomorrow is the toolkit of the solutions. So for each of the top 10 risks that were identified in the workshop, we have a set of resources, solutions, training that are already available in the system for those top 10 risks. So I highly suggest taking a look at those pieces, but also kind of what is the future of the RARCA for the automotive manufacturing. We decided to also conduct some additional root cause analysis workshops for some of the other risks that were identified in that top 10. So for those who are in that sector that are interested in participating, let us know. We'll be conducting those workshops shortly in the next few months for sure. The end goal is for us to actually go out into those workplaces within those specific sectors to have a guided conversation and a high risk needs assessment for some of those top risks that were identified in the RARCA. So this is forthcoming in the next year or so. Again, don't quote me on the years and the dates yet, but it's coming for the automotive manufacturing sector. So, but also kind of going back a bit too, is we're not just working with automotive manufacturing in this whole RARCA process. We have done this work through various phases for other sectors. Food manufacturing, that is the first one that we've worked on. We're closing the gap and we're actually conducting those high risk needs assessments in the next few months for the food and beverage wholesale distribution sector. So the people getting the food products to the stores, for example. Automotive manufacturing is coming up next. Kind of going back into the earlier phases, the grocery stores. So the folks who actually, you go to the store to purchase your product, you know, the end of that food cycle, you know, the hazards associated with that. And ironically enough, kind of tying into the automotive manufacturing, we have just finished the RA and RCA workshops for the vehicle service and repair sector. So the people that actually handle the tools to make sure that your vehicles are well maintained and safe while they are on Ontario roads. If you want to take a look at what we have in the different phases, the yellow link on that screen is the WSPS RARCA landing page. Feel free to take a look at that for additional resources. But as always, I'm going to put a pause here, just perspective of time here. Just going to check if there are any questions, again, in the chat. I don't see any, Josh. I don't know if you've noticed any at all, but questions, thoughts, comments, maybe ideas for other topics, perhaps, as a suggestion. But we're open for the next few minutes if you've got any thoughts, comments, questions.
Great session, everyone, too, and there are lots to think about in terms of how can we implement a sustainable lockout tagout practice training and have those outcomes that we're all looking for to keep our people safe. So as you're typing, if there's any questions, we're going to hang around. But it was a very enjoyable safety connection, everyone. Thank you.
And as always, if any of you have any questions about this topic or any other topics, you can reach out to us specifically. Josh is an excellent consultant, as is all of our consultants across the province. I shouldn't just single him out here, but everybody is an expert on their particular skills. So we're here to help. If we don't know the answer, we will find somebody to help you out and direct you in the proper way. Again, our goal is to make sure that every worker is healthy and safe every day. So what we do is we make sure that we give that information out to those who need it. But also feel free to share this to those who maybe were not able to attend the session today. It's not just, it is geared towards automotive manufacturing, but it's also related to any type of manufacturing sector that might have this as an area of concern. So thank you very much for your time today. And we're going to stay online unless there's other questions. Thanks, Lil.